This is Gene Lance on the Workers Beat with KNON Radio, and I've got Kooper Caraway all the way from South Dakota. What's going on in South Dakota, Kooper?
Always organizing.
That sounds right. Uh, there's an organizing webinar this Friday that where they're going to bring a Working America together with the AFL-CIO and talk about organizing. I'm very enthusiastic about that because is it not true that a lot of organizing is going on online?
That's right. Yeah, a lot of organizing is going on, just like we're having this discussion here. A lot of organizing through Zoom, phone calls, social media, stuff like that. There's been a wave of workplace action since the pandemic started.
The thing that's worrying me more than anything else is the way democracy is eroding away in America. And in my own opinion, a big progressive step forward would be if we had a workers' party. And there's kind of some ferment about it right now because a lot of the Bernieites, they're just as disappointed as they were in 2016. And they're kind of going this way and that way. I understand the Los Angeles, Our Revolution group is talking about having some kind of a discussion on a new party. And of course, the idea of a workers' party is not a new idea at all. I would define a workers' party, by the way, just to make sure we both know what we're talking about, as a party that's controlled by working people and has discipline over its candidates. In other words, if the candidates go away from the party platform, they're kicked out of the party. They're not allowed to just do anything they want to and still call themselves a member of the Workers' Party. The way that Democrats and Republicans both do now, no matter what's on their platform, the candidates still just do whatever they want to, or rather, whatever their financiers, the people who are financing them, want them to do. So, how's that resounding there in South Dakota? Is there any ferment or any idea of possibility of a different party, a workers' party?
Well, there's a bit. It's, as you know, I mean, there's a long history of, people attempting to form a workers' party or a labor party or something like that in the United States. Most countries around the world have a labor party or a workers' party. They were formed, usually between the end of World War I and the end of World War II. The working class kind of looked around and said, well, the ruling classes in our country have gotten us into 2 world wars and several economic disasters. We probably could do it a little bit better than they did. And they started forming these labor parties and workers' parties and things like that. Around the world, it's not uncommon for union presidents to go right from being a union president to running for president of the country.
Like in Brazil.
Like in Brazil, and winning. It's not uncommon. It hasn't been uncommon since the workers and labor party started sprouting up. But it's something that workers in this country have had difficult time putting together. We've come very close. We've even had national labor party conventions. I think I was 7 years old when we had a national labor party convention in the late 90s here in this country. Several large unions decided to go their own way, but it's always going to be a discussion. In South Dakota, we're in a unique position because we're facing a situation where the state Democratic Party in the past 2 years has, for the most part, started kind of crumbling in on itself. They got into some financial trouble. They ended up having to close all of their staff off, all of their party offices around the state, and they laid off most of their workforce, most of their staff. And this is coming on the heels of a state political system where the Republicans have maintained one-party supermajority since the 1980s, and so the Democrats are kind of in shambles at this point. And so at one point the unions started looking around, and one day we woke up and realized that we have more union offices than the Democrats have offices. Democrats have 0. We have 3 what's called labor temples around the state, in Sioux Falls, Aberdeen, and in Rapid City. And in those labor temples, we have a large union hall, and we usually have several union offices. And other unions have their own training facilities and offices and have their own staff and resources. So we looked around and suddenly we woke up one day and we had more infrastructure, we had more money, and more resources than the Democratic Party had.
Doesn't mean you've got a lot, but it just means you've got more than them.
That's right. It doesn't mean we have a lot. It just means we have more than them. So, for the most part, labor, at least in my state, has never been interested in being a third party, a third anything. Well, we've been interested in competing for power and competing for influence.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we woke up and realized that we have more money and infrastructure and influence than the Democratic Party does, then we might be in a position to where if we did form an independent Labor Party, then we would be in direct competition with the Republican Party, with the ruling party of South Dakota. And we wouldn't be diminished to third party status. So the South Dakota, my Labor Council submitted a request to the executive board of the State Labor Federation. And that request asked the State Labor Federation to form a committee to study the viability of an independent Labor Party. The State Federation Executive Board passed that resolution and appointed me chairman of that committee.
So you're actually in discussions in South Dakota right now about the idea of forming a South Dakota Labor Party.
That's right. We're looking at what we spent on our political programs, what we have in our PACs, what we spend in our PACs, what we use on our endorsement procedure, things like that, and we're comparing it to the money used by the Republican Party in the past several elections to see if there's a way we can compete, and if there is, the committee will submit a recommendation to the South Dakota labor movement as a whole, and look for people to sign on to that recommendation, whether it's to form a party or not.
How would that go down with the national labor movement? Or are there other states considering the same thing, or is there any consideration at the national movement, national level?
Well, in 2017, at the National AFL-CIO convention, a resolution was passed that called for what was called an independent political voice for the labor movement. It was basically the labor movement saying that we've gotten nothing out of, or we've gotten very little out of our relationship to the Democratic Party, particularly compared to what we've put in to trying to build the Democratic Party or support it financially and in other ways. And so we want to forge an independent path. And so the word we got from the National AFL-CIO is find union members themselves to run for political office.
Right.
Interested in what letter they have next to their name. We're interested in that they have a union card in their pocket, in their wallet. Because we know we can trust them. I can trust a Republican with a union card in his pocket more than I can trust a rich Democrat. And at the end of the day. And so that's the word we got from national. And since then, in the last election cycle, you had nearly 1,000 union members elected to public office on all levels of government, from the federal to the local. And so I think that's the direction the whole labor movement is going into. How can we provide an independent voice in politics? In
labor history, I know that a lot of the radicals have always said that the Democratic Party has labor in their pocket. But I've heard, I don't know how many labor leaders say, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, I'm a trade unionist. And frankly, in my own study of history, even at our worst, I never saw the labor movement as being in the pocket of one of the political parties. I don't think they ever were. They've always been a part of the working class. And even though the individuals may have made moves that indicated that they were in the Democratic Party's pocket, I don't think that's ever really been true to the American labor movement. What do you think?
I agree. The union members and the working class in general has never been bought or paid for by any political party. We don't get enough to be in the pocket of anybody. What are we getting from the Democratic Party to be in their pockets? If we were in anybody's pocket, then we would have paid family leave nationally. We would have national health care.
We'd have an organizing bill.
That's right. We would have card check. We would have some of the things that we've been asking for 100 years. You know, we would have a 6-hour workday, you know, something like that. You know, but we're not in the pockets of any of any political party. Some of our leaders are and were very close to one party or another, and that's their prerogative, and that's fine. But in no way does that mean that they're bought or paid for, and it certainly doesn't mean that the rest of us are bought.
Well, when you survey around the country, there's not really a Labor Party. Now, at one time, there was a Farmer Labor Party that I think had some influence on labor history and on history in general. There's a Working Families Party now that's effective in some states where they have laws that allow them to endorse along with the major parties. We don't have that in Texas, and I assume you don't in South Dakota either. But in a few states, the Working Families Party is able to make a contribution in elections. So as it stands right now, even though workers' parties are very common throughout the world, we don't have them here.
That's right. And you know, my region, my area of the country in South Dakota is a bit unique, because South Dakota is unique in that it has a South Dakota Democratic Party. In Minnesota, as you stated, in Minnesota, there's not a Minnesota Democratic Party. We have the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. That comes out of a merger between the Farmer Labor Party that you discussed and the Democratic Party itself. Up in North Dakota, we don't have there's not a Democratic Party. You have the Republican Party, and then you have the North Dakota Nonpartisan League, which serves the kind of moderate liberal folks in North Dakota. So South Dakota is even an outlier itself just by having a Democratic Party. Yeah, so there's plenty of institution and feeling and history from what was called, you know, the old prairie populist days, where every farmer was a socialist, and every worker was too, out in this area of the country. You know, there's a lot of that feeling and sentiment left over, and it's something that folks could capitalize on if they felt the need.
This is just a footnote to history, but at one time, the Texans around Hallettsville, Texas, which is close to San Antonio, between San Antonio and Houston, they had a really big socialist party, and their newspaper was the second largest socialist newspaper in America. And of course, they were busted in World War I when the government came down on them. But guess where they went? North Dakota. The editor of the Rebel in Hallettsville, his name was Red Tom something, and he went to North Dakota because there was still action going on there. I don't know what happened to him after that.
They went to North Dakota and they set up a state-run banking system. North Dakota still maintains the only state-run banking system in the country.
And it was the only one that came through the crisis in 2008 and did okay.
Right.
Because they hadn't done all the crooked things that the other banks had done.
That's right.
Okay, so I wonder if we agree that it would be a good thing if we had a workers' party in America, that it would be a step toward democracy. It's not a revolutionary idea. Workers' parties are generally not revolutionary. They just represent workers as opposed to representing people with big money. So would it be a good step toward democracy in America?
I say that any time that working class people can get more involved and have a stronger and more influential voice in the political system, then it would be, then that's a good idea. And I think that a lot of working class people around the country, whether they identify as one of the two major parties or maybe a third party or an independent, a lot of working class people don't feel represented. They don't, they don't feel like they have any influence over the political system. They don't feel invested in the current political system. And that makes things very easy to take away. It makes people on the far right and fascists. It makes them very happy to come in and take away people's rights if they're not being exercised anymore. So I think that anything that can, number one, prevent the rise of far right extremism and fascism in this country is a good thing. And I think if we look at history, the labor parties in other countries have been some of the strongest fighters, and the working class and labor movement itself have been the strongest combatants of the rise of far-right ideas, extremism, and fascism.
What about the idea, though, that it's just pie in the sky? That first of all, you have a historical argument. You say, first of all, we've never really had a labor party, not nationwide, and it's very, very difficult to do. In fact, I had a discussion last week in which the guy said that it's in the Constitution, and that you simply can't do anything about it. The Constitution drives us toward a two-party system because everything is winner take all in American electoral politics. So is it just pie in the sky, or is a labor party actually a possibility in America?
Well, I'm 29 years old, so you'll be hard pressed to find any idea that I think is actually pie in the sky. I think a lot of stuff that can be done. If you look at, you're right. The Constitution, whoever told you that, they were correct. The Constitution does push us to a two-party political system, but the Constitution does not specify which two parties exist in that two-party political system.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, throughout our history, the two dominant parties have changed and multiple times. And the country didn't start off with the Republican Party and the Democratic Party as we know it. You had the Whigs, you had all kinds what they said, the know nothing or the do nothing party. They had all the Bull Moose Party. You had all kinds of parties that have filled those two spaces. And so my position has always been that if the labor movement came together, we could do anything we wanted, particularly forming a political party. If a bunch of trust fund kids born with silver spoons in their ears and noses can put a political party together, surely the working class who builds and runs this country can put a political party together. But the main thing is, I don't think it needs to be a third party. You're right. We live in a two-party country, and a labor party needs to be a fighting labor party, needs to be a combative labor party. It needs to be a labor party committed to winning at all levels, and to being one of the two major political parties.
And also, we shouldn't overlook the fact that the Constitution can be changed. Even if it really were mandated, it's not mandated, but even if it really were, it could be changed. The Equal Rights Amendment came very, very close to getting a constitutional amendment through. Constitutions are not just something that's put down in bedrock, so it could be changed. And in addition to that, I want to make an even stronger statement that not all politics is electoral. The American labor movement has economic power that's never been used, not been used in our lifetimes to significantly affect the economy. But it's always had that potential. So the American labor movement has more tools at its disposal than the electoral tools, than the ability to raise money and turn out voters. So change can come, change is possible. And if change is necessary, in the way I look at history, if change is necessary, it will happen. Because people will realize that it has to happen, and they'll start to work together. So what do you think of that?
I agree. Like I said, since I'm 29, I'm only in my second term as president of the Labor Council. I was reelected at the beginning of this year. I've got, as far as I can tell, I've got another 50 years in the labor. And I'm excited to fight alongside working class people across the country and around the world to build a society that's consistent with the principles of the labor movement. Right now, none of the Democrats or the Republicans haven't shown that their values are our values. At the end of the day, at the end of the day, they uphold and support systems and policies that are rooted and based in exploitation and oppression and injustice here and around the world. while the principles of the labor movement, the morals and principles and values that we hold dear are values of solidarity and their values of justice. And I believe that economic and political systems can be built off of those values, and they can be strong.
I want you to enlarge some more on just the difference between you and me, between you and a lot of people, in that you're on the youth side. I'm on the old guys side, you know, and a lot of us are. So I want you to enlarge on that, but I have a more specific topic, because I think that we are facing a very dire possibility of world war. I think that the saber rattling against China that's going on right now, for example, is a real threat. And I don't see the Democrats nor Republicans even having a significant difference on that. When Mr. Trump was making his that awful statement that he made during the State of the Union message, Mrs. Pelosi was sitting behind him, and she only clapped 3 times, and all 3 of them were on foreign policy. Of course, everybody else was clapping. You know, the Republicans were clapping every couple of minutes. Mrs. Pelosi clapped 3 times, and it was always on foreign policies in which they had no differences. And Mr. Biden, the only thing that I have seen him say about China was that he said Trump was too soft on China, which is, in other words, he's saying they should be even more militant and do even more saber rattling about China. So, in my opinion, if working people don't have an independent voice, or don't strongly express their independent voice, we're going to go to war, whether anybody wants to or not. I think that it's a very real possibility. I think it's a possibility before November. So just on foreign policy stuff, I think a Workers' Party would be a really good idea. You want to react to that?
Well, I agree with you. I'm as disturbed as you are seeing Joe Biden try to move and outflank Donald Trump on the right when it comes to foreign policy. This is one of the most reactionary right-wing presidents we've had in a very, very long time, and maybe ever. And you want to outflank him from the right, you've got to go pretty far right. It's confusing. The people of China are at the end of the day, they're hardworking people. They're vilified. They've always been vilified by this government, but they're hardworking people. They're made of flesh and bone and blood, just like us. They have similar values to us. They want to feed their families. They want to get a good education. They want healthcare. And they want to learn as much as they can and do as much good in their lifetime as they can, just like any working person here. There's nothing to benefit working class people to any kind of conflict or war, or with China or with any other country, for that matter. It doesn't benefit us. It's only going to benefit the bosses at the end of the day, as has almost every war that this country has ever been involved in, at least since World War II. Yeah. And so I think that you're right. I mean, there is something to say for if there was an independent working class political voice. We might stay out of future conflicts. We might have stayed out of conflicts that came before. We're as far as ratio goes, we're one of the most warlike nations that has existed. We've only had about 15 or 16 years of peacetime since this nation was founded. And you look at other countries. Other countries have generations of peacetime. They have generations where they don't fight in a war. Generations where a soldier doesn't die. I think that that's something that we should strive to. But it might have something to do with them having workers' parties. These other countries that do have labor parties and workers' parties have whole generations where they don't go to war, and that might be one reason why we need one. And I want to say what you said about the Constitution. People get locked in these ideas. The Constitution is the voice of God. And it is infallible, and it exists the way it is, and it cannot be amended. Well, it was amended just in your lifetime. It was amended to allow teenagers to vote. It's been amended. What they're called amendments. It's been amended many times at our history. And other countries amend their constitutions all the time.
if the Constitution were the voice of God, we'd still have slavery.
That's right. And, we had, I celebrated my 28th birthday in Havana, Cuba. Before in a sweet spot between after Barack Obama eased the travel restrictions and before Donald Trump tightened the travel restrictions, I found my birthday landed right in between there. So I was able to spend my birthday for a week in Cuba, and there were billboards and organizers all over the place, and commercials on TV calling for people to participate in the rewriting of the Constitution, calling for working people to participate in the rewriting of the Constitution. This apparently is a process that they go through every couple years, where different parts of society get together and rewrite the Constitution, change old language, update new language, and add in new things. And it's a whole unifying national process. And it's something that could very easily be done here. It would have to be done that way because you need a majority of the states to approve of it. So it would have to be done that way. But it's a healthy process that I think we should continue to participate in. But as far as foreign policy, particularly on foreign policy, the Democrats and the Republicans have shown that they don't have the interests of working people in mind. We are not profiting from any invasions to seize resources. We do not benefit from the assassination of Gaddafi. We do not benefit from Bolivia or Venezuela. Working people struggle, and it causes working class people to struggle down there. And the old labor adage is an injury to one is an injury to all.
That's right. Well, I'm keeping you, and I know that you've got important business to do because you are an important labor leader, and I think you're a pretty well-known labor leader, and the youngest among the youngest. So let me ask you to enlarge on what you think how the youth feel, and what changes we can expect as young people begin to have more and more influence, and then we'll sign off. Go ahead, Kooper Caraway.
Thank you, Gene. As always, thank you for having me. As always, there's been a lot of talk of kind of the generational divide, and a generational divide in the particularly around the Democratic primary this time around. You look at 80 some odd percent usually in these primary states, 80 some odd percent of young folks were voting for Bernie Sanders. A larger percentage of that support things like Medicare for all, support these kind of universal social programs, and things like that. And the reality, I know that the news media tried to make the divide more racial based, but I mean, if you look at it, the divide was truly generational. Young people of color were voting for Bernie Sanders. Majority of young people of color, majority of young white kids, majority of all these other, whatever demographic you can find, if they were young, they were voting for Bernie Sanders for the most part. And you have this whole generation that is not afraid of the word socialism, not afraid of the words communism or Marxism or any of that stuff. I'm not saying that every young worker has a clear idea of what all of these things mean. I'm saying they don't have the knee-jerk reaction that other generations have had, the knee-jerk negative reaction to these phrases and to these kinds of ideas. I was born in 1990. I've never saw the Soviet Union. I didn't have to hide under my desk. I didn't have to do any of this stuff. Growing up, my generation was not taught that the communists, for the most part, were the great national enemy. For the most part, my generation and folks who grew up around the same time I did were taught that Islam and the Arab world were our enemies. I was in fifth grade when on September 11th. So we were taught that. I mean, we've grown up to be the most progressive and inclusive generation that has existed for a very, very long time. But so we don't have a lot of that built-in knee-jerk reactions to a lot of these ideas. And aside, this is a generation. My generation has come of age organizing. If you look at the early 2000s, you saw Barack Obama getting elected on a wave of grassroots. He was not, Barack Obama was the Bernie of the 2007, 2008 primary. He was kind of the long shot progressive candidate. No one really knew who he was at the beginning. He was a junior senator. He was in his first term. He was only about halfway through his first term. He was pushing for universal health care, a lot of these more progressive policies, and things like that. Hillary Clinton, folks thought she had it in the bag, but Barack Obama won, and that was largely off of the work of young people. Shortly after that, you had the Occupy movement nationwide, young folks organizing against what was called economic inequality and the corruption of Wall Street and things like that. Before that, in 2006, 2007, when I was in high school, kids walked out of school all over the country to protest George W. Bush's ICE raids, immigration raids. Shortly after the Occupy movement, you had the birth of the Black Lives Matter movement after the murder of Trayvon Martin. And then shortly after that, you have kids, in the past few years, high school kids and other folks walking out of schools to protest the gun legislation that allows anyone to get an assault rifle and come in and murder them while they're just trying to get a good education. And so this is a generation that has come of age organizing. We haven't really come of age being particularly politically ingrained, but we've come of age organizing, and we've learned from a very young age that the way to get things done and the way to accomplish your goals and your agenda is to work together with people who think like you and to organize and to hit the ground. And so that, you've got a whole generation who's come of age organizing. You got a whole generation born after the end of the Cold War, and a lot of these folks, are joining the labor movement. In the past few years, we've seen these have been the first few years, the past 2-3 years have been the first years that the labor movement has seen net growth in decades. And 70% of those new people who are joining the labor movement are under 35. They're young folks. So they came of age organizing, they went to school, they're going to work, and they're joining unions or forming unions themselves, and they don't have these backwards reactionary ideas about these kind of left-wing ideologies and things that can benefit everyone. So you've got the perfect, this is the generation that's gonna change things. This is the generation that's gonna finally, get over that hump that working people have been trying to get over for a long time.
So we can expect great things and great changes. And a spokesperson for that is Kooper Caraway in South Dakota. This is Gene Lance on the Workers Beat for KNON Radio, and we'll do another one soon.